We're here at the Institute for Policy Studies. The date is March 21st, 2014. This is part of the Lessons of the 60s Oral History Project. We have a panel here today that's going to talk about the community control effort at the Morgan Community School in Adams Morgan here in D.C. in the 60s and the 70s. And our first speaker who will lead it off, and then others will be introduced as we go along, it's going to be Edward G. Jackson Sr., who was one of the people who was instrumental in this effort. So, Mr. Jackson, go ahead and take it away.
Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Edward Glenn Jackson, Sr. My wife is Mrs. Margaret Jackson. 3 children, Edward Glenn Jackson, Jr., deceased, Stephen Jackson, and Denise Jackson. The community interns are Mrs. Ida Beasley and Mrs. Dorothy Artis. And Mrs. Dorothy Chappell was an outstanding teacher, and Mrs. Joan Broadus was the office secretary. The overcrowding of the Morgan Elementary School was focused during the 1970s and early 80s. Morgan Annex was used to relieve overcrowding of the Morgan School children located at California Street Northwest. Alternatives were used in busing students to Sidwell Friends, a private school, and to Francis Scott Key and Hardy School. Ms. Vera Stevens, due to the overcrowded condition, one of the parents of Ms. Vera Stevens made an appeal to the D.C. Board of Education about the deplorable condition of overcrowdedness at the Morgan Elementary School. And as a result of that, there was a lot of concern about how we could improve the educational quality and the training of our children. Bishop Marie Reed and myself, I was at the time PTA president, and we fought to relieve the issue. Discussed on community control. Ms. Diana Joseph headed of the Adams Morgan organization. School committee made recommendations to D.C. Board of Education about community control. As a result, they did allow us to form a community school, and election of the members of the board were made. And I was selected to be one of the community parents of the parents of member of the board. And as a result, we were able to address the concerns that were very serious at Morgan School. It was terribly overcrowded, and it presented a special problem to the community. And as a result of our efforts, Bishop Reed was elected to be the first chairman of the Morgan Community School Board. And I myself had been earlier president of the PTA of the Morgan School. And during the election, I was elected to be a parent representative on the board. And we fought to improve the condition of the school due to overcrowded conditions and the lack of facilities short in many areas. And principal, Mr. Kenneth Haskins, was very helpful in pointing out the changes that needed to be made. And from this was derived idea of having a health center at school. It was a child that took ill at the school, and so Mr. Haskin said, bring the child in my office and we use this as a health clinic for the school. It was very innovative, and it was really an inspiration. And it presented quite a challenge to the community and encouragement. And as a result, these efforts were made to improve the school condition. And due to the overcrowdedness of the condition, the children were bused. First, they went to the Morgan Annex to relieve the situation, and that did not work. So subsequently, after Ms. Stevens made an appeal to the board, children were bused to 3 locations, to the Francis Scott Key School, and also to the, let's see, the other school was Francis Scott Key, and to, let's see, yeah, to the, what's the other?
Artis School?
Yeah, yeah. So as a result, it relieved the situation to quite an extent. And through our efforts, we were able to temporarily relieve the situation, but that did not solve the problem. So as a result of this effort, the community became involved. The Adams Morgan Community Council came involved in helping to relieve the situation. And they came up with innovative ideas of how the situation could be improved. As a result, we were able to get quite a consideration of movement toward getting a new school at Morgan. And as we had the elected school board, Bishop Marie Reed was nominated to be the first president of the Morgan Community School Board. And she provided leadership and inspiration for us to move forward with the effort of improving the situations. And it proved to be very, very effective in increasing the quality of education for our children. And with the adding of the program of having community interns assist in the classroom made quite a difference in the whole structure of Morgan School, and it was inspiration in having the local community involved, and it provided inspiration for the children. And as a result of this, it would change, the whole attitude was changed, and it was more positive attitude, a positive feeling toward improving the quality of education and for our children. And it was quite an effective ordeal, and that was the beginning. And subsequently, with all the changes and the busing of the children, it was determined that we could no longer afford to be dealing with the old Morgan School. We needed a new school. So a concrete effort was made with child in my office, and we use this as a health clinic for the school. It was very innovative, and it was really an inspiration. And it presented quite a challenge to the community and encouragement. And as a result, these efforts were made to improve the school condition. And due to the overcrowdedness of the condition, the children were bused. First, they went to the Morgan Annex to relieve the situation, and that did not work. So subsequently, after Ms. Stevens made an appeal to the board, children were bused to 3 locations, to the Francis Scott Key School, and also to the, let's see, the other school was Francis Scott Key, and to, let's see, yeah, to the, what's the other?
Artis School?
Yeah, yeah. So as a result, it relieved the situation to quite an extent. And through our efforts, we were able to temporarily relieve the situation, but that did not solve the problem. So as a result of this effort, the community became involved. The Adams Morgan Community Council came involved in helping to relieve the situation. And they came up with innovative ideas of how the situation could be improved. As a result, we were able to get quite a consideration of movement toward getting a new school at Morgan. And as we had the elected school board, Bishop Marie Reed was nominated to be the first president of the Morgan Community School Board. And she provided leadership and inspiration for us to move forward with the effort of improving the situations. And it proved to be very, very effective in increasing the quality of education for our children. And with the adding of the program of having community interns assist in the classroom made quite a difference in the whole structure of Morgan School, and it was inspiration in having the local community involved, and it provided inspiration for the children. And as a result of this, it would change, the whole attitude was changed, and it was more positive attitude, of a positive feeling toward improving the quality of education and for our children. And it was quite an effective ordeal, and that was the beginning. And subsequently, with all the changes and the busing of the children, it was determined that we could no longer afford could be dealing with the old Morgan School. We needed a new school. So a concrete effort was made with the support of the Adams Morgan Community Council to build a new Morgan School. And through their efforts and support, it became a reality after many tough years and considerations and disappointments. And Bishop Reed, who had been the elected chairman of the Morgan Community School Board, was very effective, and she worked diligently to see that these changes were made. And we were on the way, and one night when I came home from work, it was late, I received a call from Bishop Marie Reed, and she told me, Mr. Jackson, I'm worried about this situation, and don't see where we're going to be able to succeed with this whole project. But I assured her that I said, Bishop, whatever I can do, I will provide my support in making this a reality, and you can count on me. I say, I'll be right there until the cows come home, so to speak, in seeing that that school was built and proven in the quality of education. A week later, I received a call from Miss Mary French, and she told me, said, Bishop Reed passed. You know, she passed on. And she had expressed to me frustrations of what we're going to do. Say, look like we're going to fail in this project. And I assured her, I said, I'm going to do everything, and I'll be there till the very end to see that this program is carried out in a respectful way. So that was the deal. So we got the board elected, and we was able to get the cooperation from the board to move forward on dealing with the community school and providing the education we wanted for our children. And it was very difficult times in trying to hold to the principle of keeping this movement going and getting a new school. But we are forever grateful for the Adams Morgan Community Council, people like Ms. Diana Josephine and the school committee, in providing leadership and support in seeing that this was effectively carried out. And people like Ms. Betty Ann Kane and Carol Swartz on the school board were instrumental in offering their support in providing and implementing and moving for the new school. And that was an encouraging opportunity. And from that, we moved forward, and the reality was felt when we eventually were able to get a new school built. And it had a big impact on the attitude of the children, the staff, the interns. The whole idea was very positive and results of where we are now. So we are grateful for all the help that we received from this community, Adams Morgan community, the Beasley Neighborhood Council, and all of these people who made a special effort to see that our dream became a reality of providing a quality education for our children and for the community. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Irene Elkin. I was Irene Wasco in the late 60s when all this project was taking place.
Do you have a son named David Wasco?
Yes, I do.
I went to school with him.
I was chair of the schools committee of the Adams Morgan Community Council when we started our struggle to try to get what we called community control of the school, when we tried to get a community school established. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I come in a little bit after the beginning of what Mr. Jackson was describing. I come in the early part of 1966. And it was at that time that Harrison Owen, who was executive director of the Adams Morgan Community Council, brought together a number of people in the community who were interested in the schools. That included a lot of the Morgan parents, who, as Mr. Jackson described, had a lot of problems, especially with overcrowding in the school. That also brought in some of the Adams parents, and some of the new young white families who had moved into the neighborhood, like my husband and myself, who also had either preschool or school-age kids. And so this was a bringing together of people who were black and white, people with different backgrounds, but all who had a common interest in trying to get the best possible education for all of the kids in the neighborhood. And since Harrison Owen is here today and as I said, was really important in beginning this whole mobilization towards the community school, and since he has to leave in a few minutes, I'm going to ask that he say a few words before he has to leave about the context of what was happening in the community, and especially what was happening in the Adams Morgan Community Council at that time.
In the early 60s, I came to the Adams Morgan area to be the associate rector of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, which is across the way. And having come from out of the South, where I was working with SNCC and SCLC and a variety of other folks, and very shortly found myself in the midst of what was happening in the local neighborhood. And it turned out that schools were happening, the Adams Morgan Community Council was happening, and the story that you've been hearing and going to hear more about the Morgan School, I think was enormously exciting and useful. I think it's also important to understand that it didn't happen in a vacuum, that there were a whole mess of things going on in the immediate neighborhood well before that school ever started, which isn't to take anything away from the school, it's just to say that context is important. For example, the Pilgrim Church over in the way was the home for the local Head Start program, which was Bishop Marie Reed's shining star. And way before she ever got anywhere near involved with the Adams Morgan School or the Morgan School, Marie Reed, Bishop Reed, as we all knew her, was out there making sure the kids got on the bus and they had something to eat and all the good things were happening. So there was that. There was a program that was going on the summer before. Somebody is kind of curious. This happened in the 60s, walked in and said, "We'd like to give you the Potomac School for the summer." And I said, "Thank you." And then somebody else walked in and said, "Here's actually a significant amount of money. Do something good with it." And we were talking schools at that point. I don't remember how it all came together, but this marvelously innovative program teaching, if you will, core subjects, reading, writing, and arithmetic, by means of the arts, was developed and evolved over the summer. So my point is that there was an awful lot going on in the neighborhood around not just the Morgan School, that was important, but it was about education as a core concern of the neighborhood, and there were a whole mess of people that were working on it. The Morgan School, of course, was very much in the center of things. I remember it, and maybe this is where I have to leave, way before there was a community school. I remember the Morgan School mostly because during the day they had the kids locked in it, and then at night they had them locked out of it. And bottom line was the kids in Adams Morgan didn't have anywhere to go. And in the wintertime it was cold and they wanted to dance. Well, I paid a visit to the Board of Education and said that if they would open up the school every Friday night, my wife and I would make sure that good things happened and nothing bad happened. So every night for, I forget, the whole year, Ethelyn, that's my wife, and I would meet with what ran from anywhere from 100 to 300 or 400 kids from the neighborhood, we decided they ought to have an entry fee, so that was 25 cents. It wasn't to make money, it was just to sort of say, well, you're here. And then we had a problem because then we started making money. And then the question was what to do with the money. And the kids came to me and said, well, you take it home. I said, I'm not taking it home. So I walked them across the street to the Riggs National Bank. See, education takes place in lots of ways. And there was 5 of us when we walked in. This was 1965. You can imagine when 6 very large black kids walk into the Riggs National Bank on Connecticut Avenue. And I was hiding behind them. I had a clerical collar on, so I didn't feel too bad. But in any event, we walked in, we said, hey, we had some money, we wanted to open an account. And the man behind the desk, who actually I knew, was a little upset. He said, well, you can't open an account until you are something. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you can't just do it in general, you have to do it for an association. I said, well, we don't have one. He said, well, make one. So I turned to the kids and I said, okay, the Adams Morgan Teen Council has just been born. Now, we have about 20 minutes to write the charter and bylaws, which we did, came back, deposited the money. Well, anyhow, what I'm trying to say is there was a whole mess of stuff going on, and it was every different color of the rainbow involved, and there was kids of every age you'd imagine. And out of that, in funny kinds of ways, the Morgan School Project emerged. So I got to leave, and I know it's going to be a great story. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to go back for a minute to something that Mr. Jackson was talking about. He mentioned Vera Stevens, and she was a very important person in the beginning. The thing that got her most upset in terms of the conditions at Morgan was when they said that the first graders had to be on half days. In other words, they'd have half the kids in the morning and half the kids in the afternoon. And she said, oh no, my kid's going to get a good education like every kid should get, and my kid's going to go to school in the first grade for a full day. And that's what started. She got together with Bishop Reed, Mr. Jackson, and a bunch of people, and they went down to talk to the, I think she was the Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools, Dr. Johnson, right. And that's sort of what happened before what I'm going to be talking about. So they got some relief there. They got some of the kids bussed out of the neighborhood, and but they didn't get anywhere near what people wanted in terms of really getting a lot of good stuff at Morgan School for the kids. So that's where we come in. Harrison brings together a lot of us. And out of those meetings, we formed the Adams Morgan Community Council Schools Committee, and I was chair of that committee. Sonora Whitfield was co-chair with me for a while. She had children at Adams. We held 2 public hearings in the spring of 1966. There were some education experts there, but mostly it was a lot of people from the community. Parents, especially Morgan parents, who were concerned mainly with overcrowding. And the other issue they talked about a lot was they felt often there wasn't enough respect paid to their kids in the school. We had a petition drive in the neighborhood asking that the D.C. school administration remove the Americanization school from Adams. There was an Americanization school in Adams School which took up 12 classrooms. And so that was one of the requests. There was also the busing that Mr. Jackson asked about. They did do the busing. They still hadn't, by the next year, removed the Americanization school. So we ended up with the petition asking for both the removal of the Americanization school and the busing. We had more than 800 signatures. And in the process of people going door to door for signatures, we also got more input from the community about what people wanted in the schools. There followed a number of meetings of the schools committee members, others in the neighborhood interested in schools, and that included some people from the Institute for Policy Studies, including Mark Raskin, who's sitting next to me. And it was from some of them, especially Mark and Sandy Jenks, Christopher Jenks, from whom we got the idea of a tie-in with Antioch College. Antioch had a Master of Arts in Teaching program in DC, which was one of the reasons we thought they might be interested, because Morgan would be a place that their students could get experience teaching in an inner city elementary school. And Antioch agreed. They were interested in working with us to bring about the creation of the school. We had more large committee, we had lots of meetings. We had more large committee meetings, we had smaller brainstorming sessions. And the basic question we were always asking was, what changes do people want in the schools? Few of us, there were, I think, 4 of us involved, Vera Stevens and Mary French and Sonora Whitfield and I, pulled together material from a lot of those meetings to pull up together what we called a list of, quote, demands. And I'm going to just run through them very quickly to just give you some idea of what people in the community were asking for.
Could you say something about what you meant by Americanization?
Oh, what the Americanization school was? Yeah, it was a school for people, for immigrants who came and to learn English and to probably civics classes. My mother, when she came to the United States in 1920, had gone to an Americanization school in Milwaukee. And basically, it was learning English and learning something about the history of the United States and so on. So it had nothing to do with elementary school education. And yet 12 classrooms were taken up by that. Thanks, Mark. So what was it that people wanted? They wanted smaller class sizes. That was top of the list. They wanted a library and sufficient books in each school. Adams did have a library. Morgan did not. I should say something about Adams and Morgan. The Adams-Morgan neighborhood is obviously named after those 2 schools, and I think it's important to know some of the history in that during segregated times, Adams was the white school and Morgan was the black school. And the 2 schools were incredibly different. Adams had a wonderful brick structure. It did have a library. It did have a lunchroom. Morgan didn't have any of that. And that had continued over the years. And the Morgan building was really dilapidated. I think Bishop Reed told me that the building had actually been condemned, I think something like 1949. Yes. So that things were really sad there, and there was a very good reason for people being upset. So we wanted a library, a lunchroom at Morgan, didn't have that either, teachers' aides from the community, tutoring, afternoon and evening community programs for teens and adults in the area. They wanted arts and physical education to be included as a regular part of the school program. And the final thing on the list was team teaching, which had really been introduced to us by people from involved with Antioch. So that was the one thing in terms of innovations that the community was right into, feeling that it would probably be a good idea, and we had been told about the success in other places, and also it was a good way that community interns from the neighborhood could be involved in these teams. We initially wrote a 1-page proposal, and there's an interesting piece of paper that I'll put into the archives, which has that that proposal on one side, and on the other side, it has in my handwriting the names and phone numbers of over 30 people, including both Jacksons, both Ed and Margaret Jackson, and a lot of the other people who ended up being involved with our committee. So, and it has a lot of doodling of my own, but I think it can still go into the archives. Finally, there was the drafting of a formal proposal. Some of the things that I just mentioned were incorporated into it, but also some ideas about what Antioch might do in terms of innovative approaches in teaching. So this proposal went back and forth between, Harrison Owen, by the way, was very involved in that. And the proposal went back and forth between Antioch and the schools committee. We presented at a general meeting of the Adams-Morgan Community Council. And what was always there, what was paramount, was the importance of the participation of the community. And that's when we first started really talking about, quote, community school. There were then formal meetings on the proposal among the chair of the Adams-Morgan Community Council, Diana Josephson, who Mr. Jackson mentioned, the academic vice president of Antioch, Morris Keaton, and the DC Schools superintendent, Carl Hansen. The superintendent agreed to support what we wanted to do. And he presented a memorandum of agreement to the DC Board of Education. There's some differences between our proposal and what that was, and if we have time at some point, I can say something about some of the inconsistencies and ambiguities in the various proposals, because I think that ended up being important. But the agreement was basically for the operation by Antioch of a demonstration school, an in-service training program for the Adams Morgan community, and the formation of a community school council, which we later called Community School Board, with which Antioch would collaborate on the demonstration project and related community education programs. I'm taking that verbatim from the agreement. There was to be a meeting of the DC Board of Education in May of 1967, at which they were going to take up this proposal. And prior to that meeting, we had another petition drive in support of the agreement, and we had over 650 signatures. And basically, we were again asking that they get the Americanization school out, and that they agree to the proposal of the establishment of the what became the Morgan Community School. At the May board meeting, there was a presentation made, in addition to the 650 signatures, there was a presentation by the Adams Morgan Community Council Chair, Diana Josephson, and the Vice Chair, Bishop Marie Reed. There were a sizable number of people from the Adams Morgan community there. I've seen the estimates differ a little bit, but it was essentially about 100 people were at the meeting. The board unanimously supported the agreement, and I can say something a little bit later in terms of how we tried to get some of that board support. And it was going to be subject to some details, especially financial ones, that would be worked out at the June meeting. But basically, the agreement was, there was the agreement at the May meeting. And some of us literally got up and were dancing in the aisles at the meeting of the Board of Education. And then there was the beginning of the implementation of the agreement, and I'm going to just say the two major things that had to happen at that point. One, Antioch had to appoint a director and some other staff for their part of the program, and the community had to choose a principal. And the community group selected a principal, Kenneth Haskins, whose background was actually in social work rather than education, but had worked in the New York area working with communities and schools together. He ended up, I can remember the meeting, it was in my living room with Ken, and it was a unanimous decision. He walked out and we looked at each other and said, this is absolutely the man that we have to have as principal of the school, and I think we made a very good decision. He was not officially on board, however, until just before the beginning of the school year. So that's what I'd like to say in terms of up to that summer of '67. And you said some things about things that happened afterwards. I think we need to have some discussion about what happened that summer and the beginning of the following year. And I don't know if, I'm trying to think, besides Mr. Jackson and Mark and myself, and I think Mrs. Chappell, you were already involved at that time, is that right? Later. Were there any other people who were involved at that time with us? Because if not, I can go on with some of it and just go back and forth between us.
Yeah, I think something should be said.
Yeah.
What was going on worldwide in 1968.
Well, there were some things going on very important actually in DC in 1968.
Right.
But not that I'm saying have to do with the school. For the first time in 1968, the year after the community school came into being, for the first time, DC residents were actually able to vote for a DC Board of Education. Until that time, they had been appointed by the commissioners, who were appointed, I believe, by the president. And so some of us were also involved in that campaign. But you wanted to say something more generally about what was happening, for instance, on the anti-war scene, or?
Well,
world, yeah, across the world, there was an eruption of an attempt to find a new common good, as it were, a new way of looking at the world. And this turned out to have an extraordinary effect in virtually every country in Europe and in parts of Latin America as well. And so these matters were such that the what happened here in our place, in our shtetl, as it were, was going on all over. And it was a momentous moment, both for men and women, and certainly for women whose voices really, for the first time, were heard in new ways.
My name is Beasley. I'm a longtime resident of Adams Morgan. I began working at Morgan School as an intern in the late 60s. I think that was a time of challenges, changes, and progress. I found the job working with the staff and the children very rewarding. I enjoyed so much my job. It was more like, in fact, I enjoyed working so much, I look forward to getting up every day going to work. Many activities and programs were put into place to enhance the learning experiences for the children as well as the staff. We all grew from that educational experience and exposure. I'm going to read this part to explain what happened after the struggles that everybody made in the community of Adams Morgan. It explains what happened from the struggles. Now the community is growing again and has become the focal point of a search for a better way for her children, her people. Long may she be successful in her aim to bring the joy of learning to all of us, parents, teachers, and most importantly, her children. So through the struggles that everybody who has expressed what happened during the 60s and 70s, it has been worthwhile, very worthwhile, because everybody gained from the experience. I know I did.
I think everybody, all of us work, I don't know if he's got the camera ready, but I think,
Yes.
I think that all of us, excuse me, Mr. Jackson, we're going to go behind your head again. I think that all of us working together, and I'll say more about the efforts to get to where we got to. I think all of us really enjoyed, Mr. Jackson and I have talked about this, really enjoyed working together. I think that was a piece of it, that it didn't matter just exactly where you lived, except that you lived in Adams Morgan, of course, but that we really had a common spirit. And it was one, I mean, to me, it's one of the highlights of my life, actually, is the working on the whole Morgan School project.
First, I would like to say good afternoon to everyone. And that my name is Dorothy L. Artis. I live in the community. And what I want to say, first I want to thank Mr. Everett G. Jackson for introducing me to this program. And I am very happy because without him, my career, I would have never had this career. Mr. Edward Jackson, he was the one that told me about the community education program that they had started at Morgan Community School. He asked me would be interested to become work as an intern, and I told him yes. I was very pleased when he asked me that. So I started. I was went to Mr. Alexander Brown. He interviewed me, and he told me just to say a little bit about why I want to work with the children. So I said to him, first you have to love children. And when I said love children, he said you don't have to say anymore. So I started in November the 13th, 1970, as an intern at Morgan Community School. Well, it was two parts of the school. It was one, the main building, and then they had one at the annex on 17th and Euclid Street, Northwest. So that was where I worked. Later, we had the opportunity to the board members, which was Josephine Butler and Mary French, was the chairperson and vice chairman, Mr. Jackson. Well, they fixed where that we could take classes to further our education. They had those teachers to come from University of District of Columbia, which is UDC. So I took classes there on the campus at the school, at Morgan Community School. Later, I went to, I graduated. I worked as an intern at the school, and then later I got my degree, which I could give thanks to God and to Mr. Jackson. So I started, I graduated in 1994. I got my degree. I started teaching at Thompson Elementary School as a teacher. And it was 1994. That's where I started my education. I got the opportunity to attend classes. And the classes at the Morgan Community School, that's where I am so thankful. When we first started taking these classes, we did not have to pay for them. They paid for those classes. And I was so happy about that. So today, I can say, thank you, Jesus. I got the opportunity to get my degree in elementary education.
My name is Dorothy Chappell, and I later became a resident of the Adams Morgan community. And of course, during that time was when I met Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. I was in D.C., Washington, D.C., but I was not in the Adams Morgan area. I also, before coming to Artis and Morgan, I worked in other sections of Washington, D.C. And then, when I think when the school really became involved, that's when I moved into the Adams Morgan A area, and I was a resident with Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. Now, at that time, I became I was interviewed. Yes, I think it's time to think a little bit. I was interviewed by Miss Lyons downtown as she was a superintendent at the time. I was interviewed through her, and then later on. Okay, so later on, I became part of the Morgan School staff, and I think I was a member of the staff before. I was not a part of the organization as Morgan School becoming a, I wasn't here. I wasn't here during that time. I came in later, but I did become a member of the staff. I at the Morgan School, and I think I had third grade or something along that. However, I think Mrs. Beasley probably forgot that she was my intern. I think she was my first intern. She
I
worked,
don't know, I've worked with so many people.
but you worked with me. She worked with me in third grade, which she was a very good helper. And I enjoyed, because I enjoyed my experience there. Those were some beautiful, beautiful days. Then later on, they start having the meetings, and that's when we started organizing for the community control. And of course that took quite a bit of discussion there. I was not a member of the board, but I was a member of, I wasn't a member, I was a staff member. That was the main thing that I was, that much. Because most of you I do not remember. When I came in, I was looking around to see who I did remember, but I don't remember. You said you were there.
Yeah, I think we may have not overlapped. I think that you started after I was involved, particularly.
Yes, I think, 'cause I don't think you were
Involved,
there.
yeah.
You were not there
I was
when
there in the earlier times.
started
Yeah,
there.
right.
But I came into the Adams Morgan organization, and during that time, that's when they started to have different meetings, and I was a part of that. And all. And one of the experiences, or one of the best things that happened to me while I was a teacher was I got my master's degree on the job training while working at Morgan School. And that was, I think, yes, I did. I received my master's there.
Was that for two of my children?
Yes, I had two. As a matter of fact, when speaking about the children, I had Mr. Jackson's 3 children. I had
Eric and Michelle, my kids.
Miss Beasley's. So who else did I have? I can't remember, but I had quite a few children. I remember all of that. And I don't think I was involved too much in the music, which I am a...
Yes, you were too. You were singing and playing the piano for programs.
Yes, I took...
You were active. I remember.
I have to give... I can't talk too much about what your organization was because I wasn't here. But I'm talking about my experience there. Because I think when I came, I had been to 2 other schools. My first school coming into the Washington, D.C. was Payne Elementary. And I worked there, and then from Payne Elementary, I stayed there half a year. The next half a year, I went to Eugene Meyer. And then from Eugene Meyer, I came over to, I was asked to come to Grumpke Elementary. And when I left Grumpy, that's when I came into Morgan School. And of course, I stayed there until my retirement. But my experience was I enjoyed I had a lot of experience. I loved the children. Many changes went on. There were good changes. And, but as I said, the happiest part that I had, the first one was when I got my master's degree.
May I ask you a question? Was that master's through the Antioch program?
Antioch, that's right.
It was through the Antioch.
It was the Antioch, under Antioch.
I think it's important when we're going to be talking about some of the problems with the situation with Antioch, it's important to know that some really good things happened in terms of, for instance, of your being able to go on and get your master's. Right.
And I think there was several others that got Mrs.
Yes, I think so.
Mrs. Lamourier. I think Mrs. Lamourier got hers to higher, but she's deceased right now. She got her master's,
Right.
and I don't know who else, but there was some. Mr. Hunter? Yeah, but I know there were several of us, and that was what you call on-the-job training. And we went to school on Saturdays. We went to school on Sundays. And took classes, the library and all. But it was all very good.
Right. And as we just heard before, some of the interns were able to go ahead and get their bachelor's degrees. So that there was, right. And I think both Ms. Artis and Mrs. Beasley, I think one of the really important things, I think one of the best things that we did in terms of our planning was to have community interns. Was to have people from the community working directly in the school and not necessarily just doing the things that sometimes teachers' aides do, like, just sort of mop up after things, but actually being able to be engaged in the teaching in the school.
Then later on, I think Mrs. Broadus came in because I wasn't too familiar with her at the time, but she did come in later as a part of the staff. Miss Miss Artis. Yeah. Miss Artis, I think you work at Reed? I'm sorry, at Morgan. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mrs. Broadus wanted to talk about things that went on later, and then after that, I'd like to go back to some more of the actual organizing that we did and what we had to do out in the community in order to have the Morgan Community School come about.
Good afternoon. My name is Joan Broadus, and I was a secretary for Morgan and Marie Reed School from November of 1970 until November of 2002. At my time working at Morgan Community School, I came there from Bancroft School, where I was a clerk and I became a secretary at Morgan. When Adams and Morgan became the two combined community schools, they had a person by the name of Julian West was their project coordinator. He had been my principal at Bancroft School. So when the secretary left Morgan School, he put me there to take the position as secretary. And that person was George Durrell, was the previous secretary. While my time at Morgan School, I met a lot of people in the neighborhood and became very close to a lot of the people. Mr. Jackson was one of them, and Mr. Brown, especially those two people outside the principal, which was John Anthony. As Ms. Beasley and Mrs. Artis was talking about the educational program that they went to get their degrees. At that time, the school was Federal City College, but the instructors used to come to Marie Reed School. To Morgan School, and they were to get their AA degrees. But during the time, there was a program called the Follow Through program, which controlled the money part of the program. So many of them were able to get their bachelor degrees. After the new school was built, then we went into the new school in 1977. And a lot of the interns went to other different schools, were transferred to other schools. Because when we went to the new school, the interns became, the name is educational aides instead of interns, community interns. Which was, to me, the difference was that the interns were to get their degrees and be able to teach in the school. But the educational aide was basically to help the teacher in the classroom. There were many programs within the school. At the old school, which was Morgan, there was music taught by a woman by the name of Sarah Day. Miss Chappell, I think, had a glee club at times in the school, and her daughter also taught dance. The physical ed teacher was Mr. Willie Demp. And I'm trying to, wait a minute. I can't think of who the physical ed teacher, the science teacher was right now. I don't remember who that was, but the librarian at the time was Normandy Blackman. Normally Blackwood went over to the new school, which became Marie Reed. Mr. Dempsey left and I think went to another school. He went to Mott, I think it was. But once they got into the new school, they had several other programs. They had the GED program, they had upholstery, sewing, music, and there's another program, I think. Then they also in the new school, it became like a middle school. They had 7th and 8th grade in the new school, which was Marie H. Reed. That lasted about 2 years, and due to circumstances of money, the 7th and 8th grades was removed from the new school, so the school just became pre-K through 6. But during my experience at the school, I got to know everybody in the school, outside the school, and my job was really like 24/7 because I stayed late, I came early, and I went home late, and I didn't get no money, no overtime money. But it was a good experience for me because it helped me to learn. And I just want to say I want to thank the people I work with, Miss Beasley, Miss Artis, Mr. Jackson, Miss Chappell. I didn't get to know Mrs. Jackson until later, in the 70s. But through the experience of knowing these people, I want to thank them for being my friend and also helping me during the time I would need somebody while I worked at the school. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of stuff.
I'm going to speak a little bit about Antioch College and its relationship to the community. When Antioch was chosen to come into the community, there was really a conflict of interest between the community and Antioch. And that conflict was that here the children and parents of the community expected the Antioch college kids who came in to be much more like teachers. Instead, the Antioch kids came in and they weren't dressed as teachers at all. They came in barefooted, and here was children.
Mini skirts.
Yes. Here was children who were dressed to the nines, so to speak, and here comes these kids from Antioch College and dressed in mini skirts, as you point out. So there was this clash of cultures right away. There was also another thing which was a few other things which were very interesting. One was that the arts and science was presented for kids. So kids had a chance of learning about fish. They could learn about science. It was called Science for the People. And they learned music as well. And if you ever listen to the radio or to television, on television, the arts program still is run by the university here in Columbia, in D.C. And you're able to hear the most extraordinary music at any time during the day or night. And that's a carryover from this period where UDC was very important in the life of art and in the life of the as well as science.
This is during the time when I think Mr. Anthony was here. We were still in the old building. And I don't know if some of you all were in the area or heard about it. Mr. Anthony chose me and my family took a picture. And our picture, a little story, was put in the paper, in the Washington Post. I don't know how many of us remember that. I could have brought it. I didn't think to bring it. I could have brought it. But all of my children were there, and including myself, we were chosen. But it was, I guess it was okay.
We got, if you want to switch to me yet? We got a lot of, since you've brought that up, we got a lot of press over the years, actually, both positive and negative, and I can say a little bit about that later. But what I'd like to do at this point is to go back to some of the organizing, because I guess that's part of the purpose of Lessons of the 60s. And so let me tell you some of the things we did that I thought was helpful in having this come about. We've talked about a lot of the positives, and there were lots of positives, but there were also some real problems that had to be overcome. And so let me just go back to some of the things we did. I have mentioned all of these meetings and hearings and brainstorming sessions and the petition drives and so on. So let me mention a few specifics about the organizing. One thing that happened towards the beginning when we started talking about community school and started using that terminology, I had a conversation with my father-in-law, who was a high school history teacher in Baltimore, and he was one of the founders of the Baltimore Teachers Union. And he said, if you guys are going to be talking about community school, you better talk to my friend Bill Simons, who's head of the Washington Teachers Union, because you better have the union on your side. So I called Mr. Simons, and he liked the idea. He really liked the idea of community school, and he was supportive. And that came in handy later when there were questions raised about the way, the choice of the principal, Ken Haskins, the community's role in the choice of the principal, in the choice of teachers, and so on. And he was with us all the way, and actually the Washington Teachers Union in general ended up really being in favor of community schools. So I think that was really important. So finding out who your adversaries may be ahead of time and trying to make sure they're not adversaries. I know that at that time there were some groups getting community schools going in New York, and they ran into trouble with some of the unions. And he is quoted in one of the later articles, and there was a lot of press on the Morgan School, and in one of the articles he was quoted as saying, I don't see any contradiction between a community school and the rights of teachers. They can go together. So that's one thing. Some of us also, and I can't remember who all was there. I think Bishop Reed was for sure, Diana Josephson, I think you might have been, Mr. Jackson, and Vera Stevens was. We met with Jack Sessions, Dr. John Sessions, who was one of the board members who we thought, the Board of Education members, who we thought would be most receptive to the idea of a community school. We had lunch with him, and he was very, very interested, and we were quite sure that he then transmitted that to some of the other members of the board. And again, he came in handy later on when it came to our choice of a principal and so on. We checked with him because we'd been told that the board might be interfering. That appointment was delayed a lot, and we thought the board might be, and I checked with him, and it wasn't the board. The board was fine with our choice of a principal. So that was another sort of getting people on board. And so, as I said, we had these later contacts with the two of them. Then some of the things about the petitions. I think the petition drives were very important. It got us talking to people at their doorsteps or sometimes inside their homes. And one of the things that was done that I haven't seen done in anything else I've been involved in was that there was role-playing done for the petition drives. Eric Jones was a community organizer in the Adams-Morgan area, and he one night at the Adams-Morgan Community Council office let us in role-playing. What do you say when you go up to somebody's doorstep and you ask them to sign this petition? What if they say such and such? You know, what's your response going to be? And I thought it was very, very helpful, and is something that I think maybe should be done more, actually, when people are trying to do door-to-door work. I had something else that I brought along, but I think it's a little bit beforehand. I was asked, by the way, by a couple of the leaders in the Adams-Morgan Community Council if I was asked not to run for the board that first summer because they felt that my husband's political reputation might somehow reflect badly on the school. And so my participation sort of ebbed at that point. I still talked to people, knew what was going on, and in January of that year I made a statement to the board about the relationship with Antioch and what had happened with it. But I was not as deeply involved because I wasn't part of the board. I'm not sure whether they were correct or not, and sometimes I regret that I did not run for that first board. My son went to Morgan in the third year of the Morgan school. He was in kindergarten there, and then at that point was when Adams decided they wanted community control as well, and since we were in the Adams area, we switched him over to Adams School. And I guess something I didn't say in the history in general was originally it was supposed to be Adams and Morgan that were in this whole thing. We asked that the boundaries between the Adams and Morgan school districts be gotten rid of, and that it be one big area. And then the decision was made in those conferences with the superintendent and the Antioch vice president and our community council chair. The decision was made to focus on Morgan. The afternoon and evening programs would be Adams and Morgan, and some of the Adams parents, like Isaac and Ruth Long, were involved all along. But the what was called a demonstration school that Morgan was going to run that Antioch was going to run was going to be at Morgan, and if successful, it could then be whatever the word is I want. It could then also go to Adams and maybe to other schools. But I think that those are some of the points I wanted to make about things we did sort of behind the scenes and to try to up the possibility of our being able to get the proposal through. I should say, by the way, we talked about community control. That term was used in the proposal that we wrote. It was not in the proposal that the superintendent presented to the board. And there was a lot of ambiguity about who had control over what. What was Antioch controlling and what was the community controlling, and how were they were supposed to be collaborating. So I'm going to go on to some of the things that happened that were not so happy and what I think we can learn from them. I think, by the way, two of the most important things the community did was to hire Ken Haskins, who unfortunately left after 2 years to take a fellowship at Harvard, and to have community interns. And they don't have them anymore, by the way. I was over at the school the other day. They're teachers' aides. But there's a lot that we were trying to do that is being done still at the school. And I can, if people want, I can talk about that afterwards. But what I'd like to do first is to talk about what happened that summer after we got control, after we got a community school, and what happened that fall. That summer, Antioch did appoint a director for the Antioch part of the program, a project director, and he came on at the beginning of the summer. As I had mentioned before, we chose a principal. He did not come on until the end of the summer, but did come. He was living in New York, came down sometimes on Antioch's payroll during the summer before he was appointed. That was a problem. And okay.
Yes.
I was talking about the Summer Institute, which Antioch was running, and which is supposed to train the teachers and the interns to work in team teaching setup, where there were going to be ungraded classes, like 5 to 7-year-olds, 6 to 8-year-olds, and so on. So a lot of new things that Antioch was bringing in. And the Institute was meant to train them to train them as to curriculum and how they were all going to work together and what have you. That's what we were expecting. What happened was that I mentioned that a couple was brought in, I think from Michigan, to run the Institute. And I was home a lot because I had just had a baby, and my second child, and I kept hearing from people in the community about what was going on in the Institute. And people were very disappointed because what happened was that an awful lot of time was spent on sensitivity training with a lot of talk about race and racial attitudes and so on. There was some confrontation of some people. And these were morning sessions, these sessions. And in the afternoon, there were sessions separate ones on science and art and I'm trying to think of the different social studies and language arts. And people were, again, with the social studies and language arts, I think those were the two that they were very disappointed in. The science and the math was done more by people who really had experience in the area. So that people felt they weren't getting prepared for what was going to happen the first day of school. They found out who the teams were only very shortly before school started, and we didn't have a principal on board until the school started. The school board wasn't elected until after the school started. That piece of it I think is okay. People felt people would be more involved once school started. But so that the community really had very, very little voice in what happened in that Summer Institute. And there was a lot of unhappiness. And along with everything else, what Mark mentioned before, in terms of the mini skirts and the sandals, they weren't completely barefoot, they had sandals on. And the afros of some of the African American interns who were involved. So that there was a lot of tug back and forth in terms of the traditionalists and the non-traditionalists. That continued some during the school year, but there also was the feeling that the Institute had not done what the Institute should have done. First of all, we had thought it was going to be a summer institute, not 3 weeks. And the beginning of the school year was utter chaos, and there's no other way to describe it. It was described that way by many people. It was described that way in the press. I should say that there was a lot of press on the Morgan School. I've said that twice, I think, already, because there really was. Ken Haskins, in fact, pulled together a bibliography, and it was not just on Morgan, it was on community school also more generally, that there were 200 items, but there probably were close to 100 of those were on the Morgan School. And so the press at first was very favorable. There's a quote about saying this is going to be the greatest innovation in DC education in a decade. And then the press started saying problems at Morgan. And there were problems. Kids were running around the halls. They were running in and out of school. People didn't know where they were supposed to be because there weren't self-contained classrooms. There were centers, and the way the teams were supposed to work was the kids were going to be in different centers doing different things at the same time. That actually is true in the Marie Reed Community Elementary School today, and it's working very well. It's well organized, and the kids seem free to move around. And I was over there on Wednesday, and there's some aspects we didn't know were going to be continued that actually were continued. But at that time, it was separate classrooms, so the kids were going between. The first day of school, parents didn't know where they were supposed to bring their kids. It was just really, really a mess. The godsend for us was Ken Haskins, who was just exactly what we needed. He immediately said that it has to change, things had to change for the kindergartners, that they needed their own class with their own teacher, and to feel someplace where they would feel safe and secure. And so he made changes like that. He was always responsive to what the community wanted, but he also was very pragmatic about things, and always very calm, and open door for hearing from everybody. And so Ken and also Hilda Mason, who I think had been brought on originally to work with the Antioch director, but became vice principal of the school and had a lot of experience in the schools. The two of them sort of brought order out of chaos. And Ken's philosophy was partly that people, first of all, he really believed in community school. And he believed in some of the things that Antioch was trying to do in terms of new methods in education. But he thought the teachers should be able to teach in a way that felt comfortable to them, because otherwise everybody was going crazy, the teachers and the kids. And so what he ended up doing essentially was teachers who felt more comfortable with a more traditional style of teaching could do that. And those who felt that they wanted to do more of the innovations could do that. And so there were different kinds of classrooms. And in fact, at the Marie Read Learning, and it's called Marie Read Community Learning Center, I think that's important. They're still keeping that. Even though there isn't a community board, there's a PTA, but they are keeping some of the things that were being done. The kids do move from center to center, and it seems to be working. I guess I may have said that before. It seems to be working very well. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, there's one point, I think, one point you might want to mention. Hilda was married to, it was an integrated marriage. Mm-hmm. And that was, at that time, that was a very big deal to have an integrated marriage. He was, Charlie had gone to Harvard as well. And so that posed a very interesting sense of what the community was.
Could be, yeah,
could
was.
be.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Bye, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I will.
Say hello to everybody. Good.
All right, rolling. Ready.
Okay, well, with the flexibility that Ken Haskins brought to the school, it was possible to get things on an even keel. And we even started to get good press again. The press followed us, so it was ups and downs. And there were ups and downs over the years. There was a spot 3 years later where a bunch of teachers left. There were some conflicts between the board and the teachers. Probably a lot of things that one could predict would happen. I do want to say, before I go into the general lessons that I think we got from this, I do want to say that going over to the Marie Read Community Learning Center the other day, I felt pretty good about it overall. And I was afraid I might not, because I knew there'd been a lot of tensions, especially in the first few years. But people looked very happy. And the kids were freely moving from one area to another that they were working in. And although we don't have community interns, there was a teacher's aide in every classroom, and the teachers and the aides were sometimes working with a small group of kids, and there'd be other kids working individually and in small groups, and loads of posters all over. And one thing I should mention, because it does talk about community and response to the community, the demographics have changed radically. It is now 60% Latino, completely different. It had been 98% black. 60% Latino, most of the rest black, with some, about 3% whites and a few Native Americans. What they're doing, though, I want to mention a couple things in terms of response to the community. They now have a counselor, a social worker, that they never had, a part-time psychologist, which they never had, and all three of those people are bilingual. So they are responding to the needs. There are two programs, and I can't go into it and don't even understand it all. There is a bilingual program, and there is an English-only program, but people get in by a lottery, and it's done within a few schools, and I can't give any details on it. But in general, I got a very good feel. And a lot of the things, oh, and this is something, I don't know, I can't go into detail on this, but I do want to mention that they have a lot of organizations in the city who are working with them in various ways. So I just will say something. There's a group called the Sitar Center, which is in the area, and they provide music, drama, art, pottery after school for the kids throughout the year, and different classes go at different times. Fillmore, the kids are bused over there with DC buses once a week, and they get a chance for a half day, I think, for kindergarten to 5, and the people from Fillmore come over for the preschoolers. There is a preschool, by the way, there's a daycare center also connected to the school, and they have, the kids there can take graphic design, drama, music, dance, and art. So that some of those things, they do have a full-time physical education teacher, which is one of the things that we were asking for. They have, I think, a part-time music teacher, but a lot of the stuff in the arts comes after school, but with these different groups, and sometimes during the school day, as with Fillmore. Georgetown students come over and tutor kids. Kirkland and Ellis, a law firm, has people coming over at noon to work on reading with the kids on a program called Everyone Wins. They say there's a self-regulation program in that the kids, when they choose what center they want to work in for part of the day, they have to write a plan for why they want to work there and why, which is great, which helps them with writing skills too. And Westmoreland Church has a Saturday school, and I guess it's for kids where the teachers and the parents decide that it would be a good idea, and they get tutoring for a 10-week period during the summer. And the lady who took me around, who's the business manager and also a parent, said that last year it was a DC reward school. It was among the top 5 schools for rapid progress. So I felt pretty good about that. But I want to talk now about some of the lessons that I think, these are the ones that I find important coming out of this, and particularly coming out of the connection between the community and Antioch College. I think it's terribly important that a community be very careful when they're going to put faith in an institution that agrees to help them. They need to know more details. They need to know more about what it means that the community and the college, in this case, will work together. The different forms of the proposal had different degrees of, as I said, the Adams-Morgan proposal said control. That's not what came out of the eventual one. And the degree of collaboration was really kind of not clear. The community has to be clear what staff members are going to be involved and their relevant experience. Antioch sent us somebody who had no practical experience in elementary schools, or I think anything, and he has written this himself in an article that he wrote called The Short Happy Life of the Morgan Community School. He was actually withdrawn by Antioch in that fall because of all the problems, and nobody knows exactly who was instrumental in his removal, but he was withdrawn, and he was never replaced, by the way. They never sent another project director. He had a lot of theory. He knew a lot about experiments that had been done. He knew nothing practically about the running of an elementary school, which was why we were so lucky that we then had Ken Haskins and Hilda Mason there. So not only who they are, but what their relevant experience is, and then the consistency in what is promised in different forms of agreement. And we need to understand the motivation of the institution and whether it is actually compatible with community goals. Community wanted a good school, essentially. They wanted the community involved. They wanted a community participate in things. They wanted the school to be responsive to the needs of the community, not only the kids, but also the teenagers and adults in terms of afternoon and evening programs, for instance. And Antioch wanted to have a place for their interns to go, and I think they wanted to try out some new things. But too many things were tried out all at once, and that's my second learning, my lesson. There's a real problem when you try to do a lot of things at the same time. For instance, in instituting some degree of community control and also innovations in educational methods. So I want to quote from Ken Haskins, because I think this was in one of the newspaper articles. There are two important areas here. One, the ability of the community to have control over its schools, and two, the introduction of educational innovation. To tie the two together, or to think one necessarily leads to the other, is the biggest mistake. What happened here is that innovation began before the community had control. Too many changes at once. And I think that's the big lesson. I have one more thing which is related to that you need considerable time for planning for the introduction of new approaches and new methods, be they community involvement or be they educational innovation. And that was not done. There's a quote from Bishop Reed which surprised me, and I've seen somebody else refer to it, saying, Antioch wanted us to wait for a year, but we didn't. It's really interesting to me because I was chair of the schools committee, and I don't remember Antioch ever asking us that, but they obviously did raise it with some people in the community council. And I think that would have been a real good idea, to do the planning. One of the words that comes up in a lot of the early stuff is there are going to be pilot projects. So the innovation might be in a classroom or two classrooms, maybe some things for the whole school, but it was going to be piloted and evaluated. And that's another issue that I didn't mention here, which is one of the things that Antioch was supposed to do also was to get outside funding for evaluation of the program. There wasn't, that first year at least, any research done. There was no evaluation of what was going on. So lots of problems, as well as you heard a lot about the bright spots, but there were lots and lots of problems, and I think a real lesson here, especially in terms of community groups hooking up with other groups who are going to help them in some way. I think that's...
I have
yeah.
one final question.
Sure.
Which is, you don't need to do that. I have one final question.
Do you mind if I get a wide shot of you guys? While you're, if you don't want it.
I'm going to need to sign some. So this is a project of the lessons of the 60s. Do you think that the impetus for the coming together of the parents and the community was inspired by the spirit of the 60s, or do you think it would have happened anyway?
It's hard to say. I think it probably would have happened anyway because there was so much concern about the schools. I mean, Vera Stevens and company had already gone downtown to complain. They'd already gotten some kids bused. So there was something, and what Harrison talked about, there was something in general, there was something about this community that I think was unique in some ways, and it was a matter of black and white people working together. Some of the articles say rich and poor. I don't think any of us was really rich, but certainly poor and middle class. And a real feeling of, well, you could feel it today, I think, a real feeling of community. And we want to do this for our kids, all of our kids. So I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, some of us were activists, and I think some of us, in some places, I mean, there are only one or two places where I've seen it said these white liberals came in and wanted to change things. And the people, the white families who were involved, the Raskins and us and some of the others who were, and there weren't awfully many of us, but that were involved, we wanted to do it because we wanted a good education for our kids and we wanted a good education for all the kids in the neighborhood. And I think that was the thing. So it's hard to say. You always have the broader context. And did we think things could get done? Yeah. But I'm quoted in one of the articles as saying, in referencing the superintendent, we never thought he'd give it to us. And, you know, we did dance in the aisles at that Board of Education meeting. I can't tell you. And the reason, and I should say this, I was going to, and I don't think I ever said this exactly. The reason we thought we got a unanimous board, which was incredible, was that half of them probably, I would say about half of them probably, were impressed that Antioch was involved. And the other half of them thought like Jack Sessions, thought that the community school was a good idea. And I think that's what made it happen.
Was
So-
this unique? Were there any other schools in DC that got this or tried to get this?
Not at that time. As I said, the original plan had been for Adams and Morgan, for it to be the whole community, and then it got focused on Morgan. 3 years later, that's why I said my son switched to Adams. We were in Adams district. 3 years later, Adams got community control. We had written into the proposal that if Adams didn't want to go do it, first of all, they were involved in the afternoon and evening plans. The Longs, who I mentioned, for instance, Ruth and Isaac Long, and then he ended up being a chair of the Adams Community Council when I was involved with the school later. And so where am I going with that? Adams didn't want it. Adams was supposed to be able to get it a year after Morgan got it. Adams' parents didn't want it at that time. There was some class difference between the two schools, which I think was part of that. They didn't want this. And then the Adams parents got upset because some of the teachers were using physical punishment. And by the way, that's something that Ken Haskins completely outlawed. That was the one rule of the school, never to have physical punishment. And they decided, oh, yes, they wanted community control. And that was 3 years after Morgan started, and that's when my son switched over to Adams. Later on, the union actually endorsed the idea of community school, and I think there were some other communities that started doing this, but I don't have any of the details at all.
What about the children who were drawn out of Adams Morgan to the Oyster School and that kind of rezoning overlay?
Yeah, and now I understand that there's Adams Oyster combination. Yeah. And again, I just heard about that recently, so I don't really know about it. Interestingly, I remember talking to some Oyster parents early in this process, and they said, you'll never get it. You'll never be able to do it.
And the Oyster parents lived where?
They lived further towards Connecticut and, you know.
On the other side of Columbia Road?
On the other side of Columbia Road, yeah, right. I could go into some detail with how my son was there for a little while, but we don't need to do that. But the Adams got its community council, and Isaac Long who was wonderful, was president of that, and I found my little award statement for parent participation.
Excellent.
Hi.
So,
well, since I mentioned that, I should say that 10 years later, we had, well, first of all, Mr. Jackson didn't really talk about the choosing of the site and Topper Carew and all of that. That was after my active involvement. You know, we were trying to get a new school building, and it was going to come about, and the district, the DC Schools Administration, was deciding where it was going to be and what the design was going to be, and some people in the neighborhood said, and I'm sure they were energized by what we had done before, said, oh no, we're not going to let that happen. And one of the main people involved in that, and Mr. Jackson can tell you all kinds of stories about that, was Topper Carew, who ran the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. And his training was in architecture. He's now a filmmaker, but his training was in architecture. And he and some other people got together, and they had an architect from Howard University involved, and they said, nope, we can design the site differently. They were unhappy because what the DC people were proposing was to tear down housing for 49 families. And they said, no, we can do it some other way, because they were proposing a football field. And Topper and Company said, no, if we have a soccer field, which they have, if we have a soccer field and we do it this way, and I think one of the businesses that there was a used car lot, that might have to go, but we can preserve the housing, and let's have it this way. And they also, and got it. I mean, there was a real struggle again. And Mr. Jackson's the person who can tell you about that, not me, because I was not involved. I think my My neighbor, Ray Firehawk, was on the committee with Topper. So they not only got, but they also got the building designed in a way that could accommodate the kind of open classrooms that were talked about. So if you go over there now, you don't have a door at each classroom, so it was easy for me to peek into all these different classrooms because they're around, the kids work at different centers in the room, and there's a lot of mobility, which is probably very, very good for little kids. So that was another movement on top of ours that was very successful. And you go to the building, you'll see. It even has a swimming pool.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay, on behalf of this session, this evening, I, as the wife of Edward Jackson Sr., I just like to say there were many showers of blessings to the entire committee who has showed up today. We like to thank you for the history in the presentation. God did not want us to suffer with Morgan's Annex and Morgan School. The brick building on the hill of 17th Street in California. We say we smell the rain. The rain, the blessings, the community school under the leadership of Dr. Johnson. Yes, we shared burdens, but we persevere. We persevere with the leadership. Morgan and Annex had a healer. The Edward Jackson, the Dorothy Chappell, the Dorothy Artis, the, what's the other name? Beasley, and Mrs. Broadus. And of course, we will never, never, never leave out Bishop Marie Reed, who was elected chairman of the Morgan School Board. Principals, teachers, community interns, PTA, and the whole 9 yards. We wish to thank you in friendship. We wish to thank you in peace, love, and prayers. Thank you, everybody. We love you. We love you. Thanks for coming. Irene, we will never forget you. We will never, never. John, we will never forget you. And all the people who are assembling here today. Thank you. We love you. And come on, say what you want to say.
All right. Yes, well, it's been really wonderful experience, and I want to thank all of you for coming out and sharing with us, and also my friend from Illinois here. She was here in a little part of the action, and we worked together, and we knew a lot of good people who are no longer with us, but all these seeds were planted, and it was quite an inspiration to see this develop. And we did not have a big crowd, but we stuck together. Sometimes we'd meet, if anybody had stayed away, a lot of things were not done. But when I called on the board during my chairmanship, everybody was there, regardless of circumstances. I mean, we had Sister Agnes there, who was a teacher representative. The different ones on the board went out of their way to deal with all these tough issues we had to do. There was a lot of sleepless nights and worries and pressures, but we stuck it together, and the results we saw in school. That was one of the happy moments of my life, when it was dedication of new school with all the inputs we got from so many dear people and neighbors and leaders in the community. And I'm just thankful for all of them, and I have every opportunity I've gotten over the years, I've shared that appreciation and admiration for what they were able to do and make a difference in the life of so many people, not only my immediate family, but for all the friends and relatives and for Adams Morgan. It's like the shining hill tree on the hill. It's certainly. So I want to thank all of you. And my friend was supposed to come all the way from Illinois here, but I remember those activist years. We met and we dealt with our issues, and they were tough. But what he did, and Bishop Reed was, I mean, we had a good relationship with each other, and up until the end of her life, she came to me just prior to her passing on to get my assurance that I would carry the mantle on. So I was determined, in spite of all other obstacles and difficulties, that we would succeed in our mission, and that was done. And we have the new school, and it's still existing today. So thank all of you for your dedication and support, and listening to us and sharing with us our opportunities and our advantages that we have the greatest admiration forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.